What is going on, people? Your friendly neighborhood saying once more is back. Once again, returning to the Infinity Saga. Now, I know it's the first thing you're thinking, gee, GSP, where have you been? It's been like, what, like almost a month, a couple weeks since you did the last review? Which I think the last review was for Infinity Crusade, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, I decided to take a little bit of a break from that. And plus, on top of like the bad taste that Infinity Crusade left in my mouth, yeah, I kind of just wanted to just get away for a little bit, just take a little bit of a break from the comic reviews. But Lord and behold, we are back, and we are back with something that is not as shit, surprisingly, as Infinity Crusade was. And we are back with Thanos Infinity Abyss. And basically, what the whole structure and plot, this whole story, if you will, is basically, it centers around a group of these clones, these genetic clones that are going around like causing complete mayhem and chaos and disrupting balance everywhere. But this is different for the fact that like it's not just any regular clones we're talking about. It's clones of Thanos himself. Clones that are based off of his DNA but are modeled with the traits of other beings. For example, all of them, like you have one that is based off of Professor X, one that is based off of Doctor Strange, Gladiator, Iron Man, and even fucking Galactus himself. And that's pretty much the standard gist of it. Like they escape, Thanos goes to Adam Warlock, Gamora, and the others to try to get help to stop them. And that's pretty much all there is to the plot. The plot doesn't get really that much farther than that. It doesn't go as farther as per se the other Infinity comics do. Now I figure what I'm gonna do so I can make it a lot better, like way more structured, better for me, is instead of going back and forth over what I hated and what I disliked, I'm going to structure first by what I liked completely, all the things that I liked about it, and then afterwards I will list my cons, like pros and cons for the comic itself, along with my final rating. Now, pros for this, the art was particularly good. Now, I noticed like it's probably a major difference because the version of Infinity Abyss that I read wasn't the original one that was in 2002. It was the re-release one that Marvel did, because they did re-release it. But granted, even for a re-release, the art looks pretty much on top of its game, just like all the other books in the Infinity Saga. Another thing I liked, of course, was Adam Warlock and Thanos, you know, just being themselves. There's a lot with Thanos regarding character development that I'm going to expand on and talk about more and more in a little bit, that I really love this character arc that's going on with Thanos himself. And then the thing that I probably liked most about this comic as a whole was the idea that once again Thanos is indeed the primary villain, but it is done in a different and unique way. Instead of him himself actually being just the main villain, it's done in a different way with the clones. And I like the idea once again of the whole character arc with Thanos. Okay, so we take it back all the way to the Infinity Gauntlet, right, where Thanos is fucking crazy, he's insane, he's out for himself, all that shit. We go from that to Infinity War and Infinity Crusade, where Thanos goes as far as to work with us in order to stop the greater threat that threatens everything as a whole. And from that, we go to Infinity Abyss, where once again Thanos is working with us, the good guys, the heroes, once again for the greater good. But this time he's actually working against a past representation of himself, kind of, because he creates these clones, you know, as security, essentially, you know, thinking they'll be as perfect as him. But all it takes in the entire story is for someone to change one line of code, and the clones take Thanos's like ideas, like original ideas and beliefs, as far, if not even farther, than he ever did. And I feel like with that, and Thanos once again having to work with us, and this time having to literally work to stop copies of himself, really speaks a lot to the character development that he's gone through. Like, you know, from threatening the entire universe as a whole with the Infinity Gauntlet, to now we're in Infinity Abyss and he's going as far as to work with us for the greater good, but against himself, against copies of himself that take his ideas farther than he ever would, ever. And I think that's really interesting. And plus that, the fact where we have to work And all that together, like, I think it really makes for some really good storytelling, because you do need character arcs even for your villains. Sometimes there is some character arcs where like you can make it to like where the character goes even more like crazier, even more eviler, or like there are great motivations for like why that character is evil. You guys know what I'm trying to say. But at the same time, there's also good character development where you make somebody who at one point was a primary focal threat of everything, and you make him as a protagonist fighting literally against copies of himself once again to stop the end of everything. And that is a really nice thing that I absolutely loved about this comic. I love that they did it. It made for some really good storytelling. Now, the things in particular that I didn't like, the cons, if you will. One of the things I didn't like is, despite having some big major key players in here like Spider-Man, Doctor Strange, and Captain Marvel like being present in the story, they aren't given very much to do at all. If anything, the one that has like a really bigger role than all these big key players that I'm talking about is Pip the Troll. You guys know how I feel about that. I fucking hate Pip. I fucking hate him with like a super hard-on passion of hatred for him. I cannot stand Pip the Troll. I hate that he's such a main focal point of all these. Like, I hate it. I hate it. Over a Spider-Man or Captain Marvel or Doctor Strange, I hate it. At certain points, it kind of just felt like the Thanos and the Adam Warlock show, and you had special guest appearances from like Gamora or Spider-Man or the others. Throughout nearly the entirety of the story, Spider-Man and Captain Marvel just spend most of it inside of like a house in like the void of reality, if you will, for lack of a better term. And that's kind of what they do with those, like with those two. That's kind of basically the most they're going to do. They get a lot more to do, but it's closer to the end of the story. It's too close to the end of the story, and I really didn't like it. I really didn't like how like everybody else who wasn't like Thanos or Warlock didn't get a whole lot of play of this. And the only one who did get the most fucking play out of this was fucking Pip the Troll of all people. He got more play than fucking Spider-Man and Captain Marvel. Fuck out of here. And then the dialogue. Oof. The dialogue. Let me tell you this. I don't have a problem with monologuing. I'm a sucker for monologuing. And some good monologuing. But the dialogue got cheesy and absurd at certain points. The part, like, especially the part where, like, Spider-Man is, like, fucking talking to himself. And just the cringiest self-monologuing shit that I did not fucking like about it. I didn't like about this comic. And while this isn't, like, a big, huge, major complaint, this one I'm about to bring up right here, but, like, Warlock narrating over the entirety of the whole entire fucking comic, I feel like they could have done without that. I feel like they could have done without that, and they could have just let the events explain them as they come along. And once again, this kind of goes back a little bit to the first con I brought up, but the inclusion and the exclusion of several characters, both heroes and villains. You know, you never see none of the heavy hitters like Captain America or fucking Iron Man make an appearance in this, like have any kind of role whatsoever. But shitheads like Pip the Troll, again, fucking Pip the Troll managed to weasel their way somehow into this fucking storyline. And I feel like there's a lot more they could have done with that. Like, in all honesty, you could have replaced Captain Marvel with somebody else. In all honesty, I feel like you could have replaced Captain Marvel with somebody else, because he was just kind of there, just nothing, kind of. Captain Marvel, and I'd say maybe Moondragon, you could have replaced a little bit. But other than that, it's just, I don't know. I just felt like they didn't have a whole lot to fucking do in the story. And I felt like those two spots could have been given to somebody else. Like, maybe, you know, one of the characters, again, one of Thanos' clones was, like, based off of fucking Professor X. You could have swapped out fucking Moondragon for Professor X instead, but that's just me. That's just how I feel. I feel like there could have been certain characters that could have been taken out, and others that would have fit more in than with some of the characters we got. And then my biggest complaint about the whole comic series is the final fight as a whole. The final fight, I was not a fan of it. It felt like the most underwhelming, anticlimactic finish in the entirety of this whole fucking saga. Because, you know, like, all throughout the entire story, you know, you have people like, you know, Thanos and like Warlock monologuing, like building up Omega, and Omega is the name of the Thanos clone that is based off of Galactus. You know, you have them building him up and hyping him up to be, you know, several times more powerful than Galactus himself. And then once the final battle gets here, barely anything happens. Like, he doesn't kill anyone, he barely manages to hurt anyone, and he gets like a full fucking head-on force, like a full-on shot to Thanos, and Thanos takes it with like only a few injuries, and that's it. Like, he's still able to walk and do everything like fine, like like he's able to tank it, and he's still alive. Like, I hated it. Like, I hated it. Like, on top of that, like, I felt like with Omega, like, there was a lack of like zero personality or character that, you know, that Galactus had. And which is another thing, like, they made it a point like, oh, he can't speak like Galactus, but with that much fucking power, who would need to speak? But again, he does nothing with that power. He goes out like a chump. And yes, what I was saying a second ago, on top of that, he has zero personality or character whatsoever. He's literally just a prop thrown in there to advance the story along, to give us like a final boss, and that's it. That's all he's there for. He didn't need to be there. He is 0% needed for this entire fucking story. He does nothing to advance the story along. He's literally just thrown in there for the sake of having a final boss fight, and that's it. You could have taken him out and it wouldn't have fucking mattered for the story. Like, as opposed to all the other clones that, you know, had like a bit more character and personality, I would have preferred if the fucking Professor X clone would have been like the main final, you know, boss. Or, you know, maybe even the fucking, you know, the Doctor Strange clone that, you know, would have learned how to master sorcery and the mystic arts a lot more and would have been pulling out some crazy reality warping shit. I would have liked that better than Omega being like, you know, the final boss fight of the story, like the final villain of the story. But him being there, it felt forced. It felt forced, and it felt unneeded. It felt very unneeded, and I really strongly feel like we could have used any of the other clones, in particular the Professor X clone or the Doctor Strange clone, to be the final big bad of the story. And this is also a little minor kind of, you know, complaint that I have. But the whole thing involving the Anchor of Reality, the whole Anchor of Reality shit, like, what was up with that? Like, actually, no, scratch that. That is actually a big problem for me. You have this being called the Anchor of Reality that, you know, helps keep, you know, like, I guess reality anchored and keeps it from like being torn asunder and going all over the place. And I guess the entity like swaps between other beings every once in a while. And the whole time that I'm thinking this is going on, where are the other galactic entities? Where's the Living Tribunal during all this shit happening? You know, the Living Tribunal, you know, he's essentially the judge of the realities. He's supposed to oversee and maintain balance in all of the realities in every single universe that's like an alternate universe, whether it's the mainstream 616 universe or the alternate universe. But you have this plot where like these clones are doing everything in their power, and they are powerful enough to actually get to the Anchor of Reality. And you mean to tell me the Living Tribunal is not going to do anything to stop that? Like, that didn't make any sense to me. Especially when like this is like the first time we're hearing about the Anchor of Reality. And I get it, you know, granted we do have to make new characters and whatnot. We can't keep using the same fucking characters all the time. But like, the Anchor of Reality's never been mentioned. Throughout this story, throughout this entire Infinity Saga, he's never been mentioned. And like, considering like in the story, like Adam Warlock is like the first guy to fucking meet the Anchor of Reality, they don't know neither. He hasn't been around before this, if I'm he hasn't been around before this, if I'm deducing correctly. So like, it didn't make sense to me. You know, you have this guy that's supposed to be, you know, this entity that's supposed to be tethering and like holding together all of reality, making sure that it doesn't get torn asunder, and you're telling me the Living Tribunal or none of the other entities are willing to step in and do anything about it? It didn't make sense to me. It just didn't make sense to me. And overall, I'm gonna have to give it a rental. I'm gonna have to give it a regular rental. The things that, like, okay, granted, it has some really great things involving like Thanos' character development and involving like again like you know how great Thanos' character and like Adam Warlock's character is. It has some good stuff with that. And even the Thanos clones too, to a certain extent, have some good shit going on with them. But the things from like the lack of a lot of other big players from that to the whole Anchor of Reality thing where we never heard about him before and none of the galactic entities step in, which you would expect considering he's the fucking Anchor of Reality. From that to like the cast that we are given having very little to do towards near the ending point of the story. And then from that to like stuff like the dialogue and like the whole final fight, it just like there's some good stuff in there. There is, granted, there is some good stuff in this comic, but a lot of it is brought down by the cons that I mentioned. A lot of it is brought down. But granted, it does still have some good things about it, so I would highly suggest like get it as a rental, read it, then bring it back. That's all that needs to be said. That's all that needs to be done. But as always, if you like what I had to say, don't forget to like your likes, comment, sub, share, shares. Now we'll see y'all on the next video. And as always, peace and chicken grease.